Well, I have a question for you this morning. What is your relationship with patience? With patience. Does it mutually nurture one another like a gently rocking, sleepy baby in your arms? Or is your relationship with patience a little closer to resembling the frustrated exasperation of trying to hold 4 screeching, screaming cats in your hand? I myself lean a little bit more towards the cat side. I ask you to reflect on this question because our relationship with patience has consequences. Consequences for our lives and our lives of faith, as this story demonstrates. One day, an aspiring martial arts student comes to the sensei and asks, "I want to become a black belt master. How long do you think that will take?" The sensei looks over the student and says, 10 years. 10 years. Shocked and a little disappointed, the student pleads, "But I can't wait that long. I need to master the black belt faster than that. I'll work hard. I'll practice every day, 10 or more hours if that's what it takes. Then how long will it take?" And so the sensei shrugged, also a little bit disappointed, and says, "Well, in that case, it'll take 20 years. The sensei knows that patience is the ground from which spiritual growth occurs. Clearly, the student must not only now learn the motions of the martial arts, but the patience out of which the self-control that underlies the martial arts occurs. And that will delay his attainment of the very thing that the student desires so avidly." There is a little of that student in each of us. Like him, we are impatient to reach our goals, and the more that we long for something, the more impatient we get. And how could we not? How could we not? Patience as a cultural value has eroded so completely in our modern time that patience now feels almost like a liability, like a justification for laziness. Fast. Now that's what we admire. Fast. That's what we desire. That's what we value. And the only thing better than fast is instant. This past week, in a long Starbucks line, I started to get impatient. And so I started to multitask and do some research on this sermon. And the irony of that moment, it was not lost on me as I impatiently began to type in the Google search box, "patience," on my phone. And in exactly 32 hundredths of a second, I had over 120 million results. Who needs patience? The ancients said patience is a virtue. But in our all-access, all-the-time world, is patience still a virtue today? Is it a virtue in our lives? Do we believe that there are things that patience can bring into our life that nothing else can? No cyberspace quickness, no instant messaging, no Instagram. The sensei knows it, and our scripture this morning says the same. Patience is the fertile, holy ground out of which the fruits of the Spirit grow. Without patience, our spiritual life is a barren, desert-like ground. This spiritual barrenness is the background of our scripture this morning, which Barbara read. The Israelites, they've just escaped from Egypt, and now they're crossing the Sinai Desert. You would think that they would be filled with faith as they go to the promised land. And then Moses goes up to the mountain to once again talk with God, who has been faithful to them, to get further guidance, further instruction for the people. But he starts to linger on that mountain for a day, two. Meanwhile, the Israelites, they lose their patience, waiting for Moses. And when they lose their patience, just as when we lose our patience, awaiting further guidance and instruction from God, the Israelites abandon God. They conclude that they are now on their own, despite everything that they have seen, and that they now must take matters into their own hands. They make new gods, better gods than they had before, they think, by casting golden images. And that decision, born out of impatience, it has consequences on their lives and on ours. The consequence for the Israelites is that it took much longer for them to cross the Sinai Desert. Now, the distance from Cairo, Egypt, to Jerusalem, Israel, the Promised Land, it's 230 miles. It just so happens it's 234 miles from Miami to Orlando. I'm not saying Orlando is the Promised Land, but it's the same distance. Now, walking just 5 miles a day, it would only take the Israelites 46 days to get from Egypt to the Promised Land, and yet their decisions made, their actions taken, born out of an impatience, has consequences. And instead, the Israelites, as you know, wandered that desert for 40 years, not 40 days. Those who had abandoned God in their impatience and assumed upon themselves the role of God as creator never realized the blessing promised in the Promised Land. That was their consequence for their impatience. But what is ours? When we lose patience, we begin to get agitated and antsy and a bit angry. Now, perhaps you have noticed in your life, as I have, the choices made when agitated and angry rarely are those that lead to healing or joy. Likewise, when we lose patience, it is because we have lost faith. We've lost faith that God is still with us, guiding us, that God has instructions for us. And when faith flees, fear is what takes its place. The choices made out of fear, just as those that are made when we are agitated and angry, they are less than ideal when it comes to enhancing our life or the lives of those around us. Faithless decisions that succumb to fear's imagination, well, they do not create divine outcomes. So what are we to do? How can we in our lives develop the patience from which the fruits of God's Spirit grow? Well, this image may help. In the Sanskrit of Hinduism, one of the names for God is Kshamas Agara. That translates as an ocean of patience. God is an ocean of patience. Now, within that image, a person who is impatient is like a person who cannot swim, despite being in God, the ocean of patience. And thrust into those deep waters of hardship, they begin to flail about in a frightened panic. And the more they flail, the faster they sink. That is how it is with us. When we get thrown into situations that try our patience, situations where we suffer or are desperate, we too lose our ability to stay calm and to keep the faith. And instead we begin to flail about, doing whatever we can, anything, just to get things moving along as the Israelites did in the desert. It is counterintuitive, as hard as it may be in those difficult moments. But our spiritual salvation and the sure way to peace and well-being for us and others in those times is to simply stop. Stop. Take a deep breath. Be in the spirit of prayer. Relax. Stretch out your arms and your legs out into God's presence. If a person in deep water in the ocean, whether they can swim or not, does that, they will naturally rise and float on the surface of the sea. In the same way, on dry land, when we find ourselves in an overwhelming situation that tries our patience, if we stop, if we take a deep breath, enter into prayer, relax, trusting in God's presence, we too begin to float, not on a literal ocean, but on the ocean of patience, which is God. God's Spirit. God does, and God always will buoy us up in those times. But we have to trust God enough to let go and float on God's Spirit. Look at the picture on the front of your bulletin. It is a picture that shows the growth of a seed over time. Now, some seeds begin to grow in just a couple of days after planting. Radish seeds do that. Some other seeds, like bulbs, must go through a freeze first until they spring forth in the following spring. Others must wait for a forest fire to crack open the tough seed coating before it can germinate, and waiting for that forest fire can take years. It is easy to lose patience with the unseen seeds of blessing that God has planted surely into our life, especially if we go through long patience testing periods in which it looks as if nothing is happening. Nothing graceful. We may even feel in those times, as the Israelites did, that God's grace has abandoned us. But it is not true. It is not true. Look closely at the second and the third seed in the series on your bulletin. There you can see the roots indeed have grown out of the stem, out of the seed, stems too, and even some leaves. But those developments still lie below the surface of the soil, unseen to an observer. If our impatience leads us in our times of waiting to walk away from the seeds of blessing or abandon God because we fear that God has abandoned us, we will miss the fruits of blessing that are ripening in due time for us. Unseen. Such missed opportunities, those are the fruits of impatience. The fruits of the Spirit, on the other hand, come when the spirit of gentle patience triumphs over the spirit of forced outcomes. That is the spirit that turns swords into plowshares, preempts war with peace. Patience is the fertile, holy ground from which forgiveness grows, and decisions are made that reap unbridled joy rather than the decisions that breed expedient disappointment. I don't know what challenges this morning test your patience, but I'm sure something does. That is the nature of life. In such moments when agitation and anger begins to stir, if you feel like you're about to jump out of your skin with exasperation and you're on the verge of taking matters solely into your own hands, resist. Resist. Resist forcing your way through doors that are better off left shut. Instead, wait patiently for the divine door of blessing to open in the right time. Resist, as counterintuitive as it feels, by relaxing into God, the ocean of patience. Use your faith as your flotation device. Trust the roots of grace have indeed taken hold and are growing in people and in places unseen, ready to blossom into blessing at any moment. For God is, whether we see it or not, always was in the desert and always is now in our own lives, leading the faithful to the promised land.